So now we're focused on this, and the first thing that I wanted to talk about as far as a signal chain goes is one of my favorite things in live. I joke about how if someone took live away from me and had to pick like I don't know two audio effects to bring with me, it's like those weird questions that people ask you about if you get stranded on an island, like what will you bring? If I got stranded on an island, I could only pick like two audio effects to take with me in live. They'd probably be EQ and compression. It's so underrated, right? Like, I mean, everyone like kind of looks down on EQ and compression, and they're like, "Oh, it's just EQ and compression." But it's EQ and compression. Like, I get really excited about it too. But anyway, but let's take a look at EQ. So I'm gonna click in the browser over here, and usually EQ is housed in audio effects. Let's go ahead and pull this over here onto this track. So I'm going to temporarily turn off my vocal recording rack and all of its inbuilt devices. I'm going to show you a little bit of that later. But let's start off with some EQ. So let's play this back and let's check out what my vocal kind of sounds like and looks like. So I'm going to also bump up the volume a little bit too. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you might see that that's got a lot of low end in it. For a lot of vocal stuff, especially if you're working with a vocal that's a little bit higher in pitch, so from a traditionally woman or female sort of voice, for example, we don't always need any of that low information. So usually for a lot of vocal processing that I do, especially if it's in a live performance where you really want to have a lot of control over your mix and the bass frequencies, anything that's in the lower range too, I try to put on a high pass filter. This is going to be in the lowest band of EQ8, which is this particular device that we're looking at in live. And what EQ8 is great for is having 8 different EQ bands that you can manipulate individually. So usually when I'm working with EQ8, almost always the first thing that I do when I have a vocal is to give a high pass filter and bring it up until where the vocal starts to really sound high pass. So it's almost like going super extreme and then bringing things back a little bit. So let's do it. Let's go like super extreme and see if we can find a sweet spot. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. So I'm actually going to stop there. It's a little bit higher than I expected, but hey, it sounds pretty neat. A great way that you can kind of compare what the EQ is doing or what it's not doing, if you ever want to check, is to do something called A-Bing. And that in live, when we do that, it's usually just to turn a device on and off. So if I can turn the device off, here's before EQ. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and here's 3, after. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So if you hear it immediately before and after, you can hear the audible difference. But that said, if I just played this for you off the bat, like if I talked for a little bit longer, la 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 la, and we kind of relaxed our ears a little bit, refreshed our ears, had a clean cleansing of the ear palette, if you will, and if we just listened to it, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. It actually doesn't sound too bad. So that's the first thing that I do. I usually have some kind of high pass filter on a vocal. If it's a male vocal or if it's a lower type of voice, again, I try to do the same thing. I try to be a little bit more extreme first and then dial back on it. In the case of that kind of voice, though, there's a lot of lower frequencies that are a little bit more crucial to the original timbre and the original sound of the voice. So I'll usually do a high pass filter, but also do a dip over here around the mid range, so around like 200 and something. But I'm going to go ahead and reset that now. So if you ever want to reset any control in live, for example, the gains of your EQ8, like over here, I'm going to just double click on that and it'll automatically go back to the default. And I'm also going to head over to the high pass filter and just bring that up a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think that sounds okay. The next thing that I like to do a lot for vocals, and this is actually maybe a bit more specific to me and specific to a couple of folks who have a little bit of a resonance in their voice. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly what this is, but maybe for anyone who's watching tonight, especially if you happen to be, say, a vocalist who ends up working a lot with your own vocals like I do. I often have to like mix my own vocals, tune my own vocals, a bunch of those things too. I like to listen very carefully and after a while, and this is something that happened for me really after a long time, I realized that my voice kind of has a natural resonance around the 3 kilohertz range. So that's like around 3000 hertz. It's going to be somewhere around here. I'm not going to play it while boosting it at the same time because it might kill our ears and we want to protect our ears, but maybe I'll just do a little bit. So usually my voice is like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2,
three, four. 1, 2, 3,
And usually, if
4.
I'm singing, there tends to always be like a super resonant place around the 3 kilohertz range. How did I actually realize that? Well, it came out from just a lot of experimentation with my voice. And then I realized every time I was EQing it, I was always taking out 3K. So I was like, hey, Claire, you're kind of resonant around 3K. So that's why I started creating different kinds of presets, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. So that's one thing that I do a bit for my voice too. I kind of have a little tiny dip around 3K. And usually I make the bandwidth or the Q a little bit smaller too, so that I'm not dipping down too many other frequencies. Now, the other thing that I try to do for my voice, and this is super applicable to any folks out there who maybe, if you've ever heard friends tell you that your voice is like a lot of whispery sorts of things in it, or different kinds of higher tones, you might have something that's called a hypersibilant voice, like me. And it's not too much of a problem if you know what actually it is. So for a lot of folks, if you have a hypersibilant voice, anything that is a sibilant sound, so things like those like really high frequency sounds will tend to cut through a lot more compared to people who don't have a hypersibilant voice. And usually hypersibilance happens when, and this is like my nerdy theater school drama weird education part coming in. But if your tongue is usually articulating like very closely to the back of your teeth, like mine just did in the entire last sentence, you'll have a hypersibilant voice. So anything that's a sibilant sound will be very, not very piercing, but it'll be more prominent than someone whose tongue is placed back further in their mouth from their teeth. So that's just something to be aware of if you've been EQing a lot of vocals, or maybe you're working on another vocalist's voice and you notice that they're like super hard to control with sounds like all of these like higher sounds. So what I like to do also usually is do a little tiny dip at my sibilant area. For me, I found that that tends to actually be around like 6K or 7K. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this fourth band of EQ8 into a band. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you a little bit of what I mean. We might be able to hear this a little from the word two in my counting, but let's see what happens.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2,
Yeah, and
3,
you'll see
4.
that in this case, actually, it's even a little bit different too. In this case, the sibilant part really is not too bad. And also it's around like the 7 or 8K range. But in any case, I'm going to just demonstrate this a little. So I do a little dip down there and also just increase the Q. So that's really just taking out that little sibilant part. That said, the more you experiment with this and the more you get in depth, you might develop some kind of specific EQ shape that you use a lot. And I do hope this isn't alarming. I'm going to turn off my EQ, but I'm going to turn on this vocal recording rack that I had and show you the usual EQ that I have on my voice to start off with. So this is just like rudimentary EQ to fix different parts of my vocal that I've become a little bit more cognizant about. And I will also add that this preset was developed for this specific room. So depending on what kind of room you're into and what room you're recording your vocals in, that's something that you might also want to consider, whether the room has specific resonances because of the way it's built or because of its shape or its height. So a few other considerations too, but let's check out this EQ. Ooh. So this is what I have instead. Here is before.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3,
And here's
4.
after. Now it doesn't sound like, it might sound a little bit sad actually when you you hear it. And that's because what an EQ is doing is you are actually controlling, if you think about it, the specific volumes of individual frequencies. So if you have a lot of aggressive EQ, you may change the overall perceived volume of a sound. But that's something that we can always try to help a little bit with when we get into the second favorite thing that I love putting in, and that's compressor. So we're going to keep this EQ up over here. I'm just going to double click on its name so that it folds up and gives us a little bit more space to work with in the device view.